golly, 28 years ago this week, it was officially announced that Bret Hart had signed with WCW. Now, you were, of course, a part of the WWF locker room at the time, and you'll recall September 22nd, that's where Vince meets with Bret in Madison Square Garden and lets him know, hey, we can't afford your contract. See if you can get your old deal. Fast forward 5 weeks, and he's got a deal with WCW. Now, what's interesting about this is, John, this was super fascinating in 97 and it's still interesting now. You've got the world champion of the WWE, and it's now public knowledge that he signed a contract somewhere else. That was not common back then or at any point in wrestling, right?
No, it wasn't. It was September 22nd. Is that right?
Yep.
That's my mother's birthday. She just turned 89. So I didn't realize that was I didn't realize at the time that that was announced on my mother's birthday. Maybe I missed her birthday that year. Maybe I'm a bad son. Hopefully I'm not. When this happened, you're right. Things like this were not let out of the bag. But when it happened, I remember being depressed. We'd already lost Scott and Kevin. We're getting our ass kicked in the ratings. And now we're not just losing one of the greatest of all time. We're losing our champion, the guy who's actually the champion at the time. This is what I've told you many times before. I went to Lanza and I'm like, what's going to happen? Lanza goes, as long as that guy's in that chair, we're fine, to my Vince. And I felt a lot better about it. I didn't feel good, but I felt a lot better about it because he explained to me, he goes, I've been here when Hogan left. I've been here when Warrior left. I've seen all these guys leave. As long as that guy's there, he goes, we're going to be fine. And Lanza didn't blink. And he really assuaged a lot of concerns from a lot of people, especially me, because I'd never seen guys leave. And Bret was, man, he wasn't just on top of the world. He was the champion of the world. We're losing everything at this time.
Here's the Cliff Notes version. September 22nd is the first time that Monday Night Raw is in Madison Square Garden. It's also the first time we would see Vince McMahon take a Stone Cold Stunner. It's also the first time we would see Cactus Jack make his debut in the WWF. So there's a lot of positive things happening here. And it's around this same time that Vince McMahon changes the 2-hour In Your House pay-per-view at a reduced price to expand it to the regular 3-hour pay-per-view format at the regular price. So after Vince meets with Bret and says, I can't afford your contract, see if you can get your deal in WCW. I think he was doing that almost in deference because, again, I wasn't there in the conversation, but the way the story's been retold is Vince wasn't saying, I can't pay you ever. I just might not have the money right now. It was a cash flow circumstance. So maybe he was looking to restructure some of the debt, but he allows Bret the opportunity to at least talk to WCW. And in theory, I think they said they'd give him till like the 1st of November to sort of see, are you in or are you out? Because he couldn't just allow him to negotiate and keep that leverage in perpetuity. So in theory, I'll give you like a month to figure that out. Now, before that month is up, as the story goes, John, Vince goes back to Bret and say, hey, I found the money. We've stabilized the finances. I can honor the contract. But Bret still has this option through the 1st of November. So as the story goes, he asks, what are your creative plans for me? And allegedly Vince says something back, a series of events that, well, they don't do justice to the Hitman character, at least in Bret's mind. So he picks WCW. Did the locker room know that Vince had made the second visit to say, I found the money? And Bret asked for the creative plans. And when Bret tells the story, it's almost like he was getting buried. Now, I know that's just wrestling speak. A lot of guys throw that term around. But did you know that there had been a subsequent meeting to the first one saying, hey, we found the money, but here's the creative plans? Or was that always a blind spot for the locker room?
No, we did. To my knowledge and my recollection, we didn't know any of that. We knew the first one that Vince said he didn't have the money. And, I don't think we were surprised at that. We weren't making any money. I mean, Conrad, we drew, I think, 800 people one time in Reunion Arena in Dallas. That's the old Mavericks Arena, where the Von Erichs would run, on their big shows. But now it's American Airlines Arena. I don't even know if it's there. If it's been torn down. We drew 800 people there. We lost a fortune. They tried to talk Vince into running the Sportatorium. It was so bad that we weren't selling tickets. And Vince said, I just can't do that because of perception. The optics looks bad. That's how bad business was at the time. We weren't making money. And so when we've heard that Vince didn't have the money to honor the contract, that was not that surprising to us. I mean, you got a whole other roster. I mean, did it worry us? I don't think it did, because we realized that we thought Vince had made a mistake here. And I think he did. I think he obviously did. He made a mistake if he let Bret either out negotiate him, or he promised Bret too much that he couldn't deliver. Now, I don't think he saw that within a year business would turn around, but if Bret had stayed, it probably wouldn't have, because you wouldn't have had Mr. McMahon creative. You wouldn't have had the Montreal Screwjob. You probably wouldn't have had Tyson. You wouldn't have had a lot of things. So, I don't know if he'd had it going forward. We just thought Vince had made a mistake and he was getting out of it. And so, but I don't remember ever hearing that second part of it, that Vince said he had found the money.
So I do want to ask, you were in the locker room at the time. How did you think WCW would handle Bret? How did you think Bret would fit in the WCW landscape? I ask because there's a story out there, and who knows if this is real or not, that Vince back in 1996, I guess, and we just talked about this last week on the program, where Bret announced on Monday Night Raw in 96, hey, am I going to WCW or am I sticking with the WWE? Apparently during that timeline, so a year prior to this, Vince said to Bret, WCW wouldn't know what to do with a Bret Hart. Now, obviously, Bret had spent the bulk of his career at that point in the WWF, and what's the old phrase? The devil, I get that. But how did you think Bret Hart would fare in WCW? You'd seen the success of Kevin Nash. You'd seen the success of Scott Hall. You'd seen the success of the Macho Man and Hulk Hogan. But respectfully, it's getting kind of crowded over there now. Now, this is before Goldberg is really Goldberg, and Diamond Dallas Page is still kind of a mid-card player at that point. But with Sting and Lex Luger and Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage and Ric Flair and Scott Hall and Kevin Nash and the Giant, did you think Bret could find a footing in WCW? What did you think his upside was there?
Huge. I thought it was huge. I thought he would be a bigger star down there than he was in WWE. I mean, wow. you take a guy who was a lifelong WWE guy, who was Mr. WWE, who everything about him bled WWE, and you take him and put him in WCW. I thought he became a bigger star down there, and the reason I thought it, and I think most of the boys did, I can't speak for, other guys, obviously what they were thinking, but from what I remember guys talking about, it's because Bret would probably be in charge of more of his character. You go down there, and it's not that Eric couldn't do it, but Bret knows how to be Bret Hart. And so I think I just figured Bret was going to be Bret down there. I thought he'd be a massive star down there. I mean, that was the knock against WCW. They couldn't create stars, but they had created the NWO. Now, whether that was handed to them or whatever it was, it happened on Eric's watch. I mean, they created the biggest angle in the history of wrestling, and they're killing us. And now they're getting our champion. I thought Bret would be bigger down there than he was in WWE.
Well, that's interesting because we know it didn't work out. And in fact,
it was horrible, Conrad. I mean, it was terrible. I mean, the mistakes they made, and I know there were probably some reasons to do it. I don't know why you didn't have Bret on the next Monday. I mean, the next day, I don't know why you don't have Bret out there. Man, what a freaking mistake. Have him out there with a replica belt, throw it in the trash like Medusa did. Do something. I don't know why you don't have him out there next Monday. I don't know why you waited so long when you debuted him. It was a terrible debut. I mean, I just thought that. I thought as good as stuff they did with the NWO, it was as bad as what they did with Bret Hart.
If you go back to 1994, the first thing they did in WCW with Hulk Hogan, because let's be clear, in 94, Hulk Hogan was the biggest star and there was no close second. So when he finally comes to WCW, there is a almost once in a lifetime opportunity. Hey, we can finally deliver the WrestleMania main event that Vince never pulled the trigger on. Hogan versus Flair. It set an all-time pay-per-view record for WCW at that time. I'm, of course, talking about Bash at the Beach 94. But when you bring Bret over, I think I just would have done the exact same thing. Why wouldn't we make the dream match of Bret and Hogan? And we know they did have several matches on the house shows later, but let's talk about that. At the end of 1997, this is when we're going to blow off the Sting Hogan thing. And I get we're in the middle of that storyline. We got to pay it off. But it does feel like immediately we could go right into Hollywood Hogan and Bret Hart. That would have been a natural, but it doesn't happen. Do you think perhaps the reason that match never happened in the WWF, and really it never happened in WCW on like a pay-per-view main event feud level, do you think Hogan, and I'm not trying to speak ill of the dead, do you think he just didn't see Bret at his level, maybe, or is there something else?
He could have. I think the timing was bad, is what I think it was. Hogan worked with anybody. Hogan could sell out with Bruno, and I love Bruno. I just texted him yesterday and was talking to him. Hogan could sell out a show with freaking Bruno, downtown Bruno, and have a good match. Hogan, every big match was Hogan. Whether it's Hogan Andre, whether it was Hogan Savage, whether it was Hogan Warrior, Hogan Sid, whatever it was. I mean, Hogan was the guy. And then all of a sudden in WCW, it was Hogan Flair. I mean, these are all the biggest matches of all time. Hogan Bret fits right in there with any of them. Maybe not Hogan Giant, because that was probably the biggest of all time. But, Bret was the guy that took over after you had this succession of champions. You have Macho Man, you have Warrior, you have Sid, you have Bret. Bret is the guy here, the heir apparent. It made perfect sense to have Hogan versus Bret. And I don't know why it never happened. I think they just dropped the ball. I don't think it was Hogan thinking that Bret was anything other than a main eventer. He was the guy, and there's no doubt about that. And this would have been another terrifically bought pay-per-view because, I mean, Hogan sold out with everybody. Every single person, Hogan could sell massive amounts of pay-per-views, and big names, you set records. And I think he would have done that with Bret.
It's interesting to think too, because I think a lot of people look back at this, we'll call it November 97 timeframe, and they think about almost like there's a fork in the road with the WWF. Does Vince go with Shawn or does he go with Bret? And we know he ultimately goes with Shawn, but fast forward to the end of March. So less than 6 months later, and Shawn's gone too. And he's going to be sitting at home injured, but still collecting a paycheck. Meanwhile, when Bret goes down to WCW, Goldberg kicks his head into the third row. That's the end of his career. He has to retire. And WCW, even though they had extended his contract to 5 years, cuts him because he's injured and they're trying to cut costs. Does that news make the WWF locker room? Hey, they cut a guy. He got injured in a WCW ring. They cut him. And now there's no income at all. Was that just business as usual? Because it does feel like if that would have happened to Bret Hart in the WWF, they would have found a way to keep him employed. I mean, Shawn collected a check for years while he was sitting at home, but that did not happen in WCW. Do you guys in the locker room find out about that?
Yeah, we did. And we're more concerned about not necessarily that, because injuries happen. And if injuries, they want to fire you, they can fire you. These contracts are the most one-sided contracts you've ever seen. I have no idea what they are now. Back then, they were horrible. I don't know how WCWs were. They obviously were one-sided because they were to get rid of Bret when he had a concussion and not honor their contract, which is a pretty shitty thing to do. You think a contract would be better written than that, but the WWE contracts were not. They were very one-sided. You had to out after 90 days, but WWE didn't do that. WWE took care of their guys. I had my downside guarantee one year, and I had one of my surgeries, and I was going to miss the rest of the year. And Jim Ross called me and said, "Hey, you've already made your guaranteed amount for the year," because I was getting paid the amount, not the annualized 52-week pay. And I said, "Yeah, I know it." And I figured they weren't going to pay me. And he goes, "Vince and I are going to ignore that and just keep paying you." And they paid me for the whole year. I mean, that's how WWE treated guys. Even though the contracts were very one-sided, you knew who was on the other side of that contract. You knew the handshake on the other side of that contract was valid. WCW obviously wasn't, but that didn't worry us as much as the fact they didn't know how to use Bret. That worried us more, because if you want to go down there, you get hurt, bad things happen. Shit happens in life, and you can't control that, but you can control going to a place that doesn't know how to use you. And that concerned us more than anything else. You got the great Bret Hart, and you don't know how to put him out there. And I know Eric has some reasons for not doing it. There were some contract issues. I don't know all those, but that concerned us more than the injuries.
Well, to be clear, I don't think Eric was necessarily running the show in October of 2000, but it was on this exact day, John, as we're recording now, October 27th, 25 years ago. It was October 27th, 2000, where Bret Hart went on his website and announced that he was officially retired from in-ring competition.
He had a website back then?
Yeah, he certainly wrote a column too, as you'll recall, for the newspaper, and that's where he would sort of just, share all of his thoughts. But I think it's interesting to take a look at what could have been, because I think we all know, and I'm not clowning on Goldberg here, his injury probably wouldn't have been cut short had he stayed in the WWE. Yep. Shawn would have been gone 6 months later. whatever financial peril the company was in, they would have fixed it. Whatever booking plans he didn't love. I mean, because even when you think back to like early '98, we know it's January '98 where Shawn cracks his back on the casket match, the edge of the casket with the Undertaker at Royal Rumble. He winds up missing the No Way Out pay-per-view, and somehow they get the match in the ring at WrestleMania. But if Bret was still around, they could have easily audibled and pivoted with that February pay-per-view in '98, just like they had to at the 4-way in Chattanooga in February '97. And think about WrestleMania 14 at that point. It could have been a rematch from the greatest WrestleMania match of all time, Stone Cold Steve Austin and Bret Hart, now for the title, not just middle of the card, I Quit match with a special attraction referee, but for the big belt, the Bret belt. That would have been something special. It's interesting to think what could have been, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And the guys on different sides of the fence, you know, and plus that angle, Conrad, you know, you remember it well as watching it. That angle was hot as fire. The Canadian versus U.S. angle. It's just the old, God almighty, it's Michigan, Ohio State, it's Texas, Oklahoma, it's Georgia, Alabama. I mean, it's just the easiest thing in the world to run this international angle. That angle was fire. Absolutely freaking fire. Now, if Bret had stayed, what happens with Tyson and Mr. McMahon, don't know for sure. But if you've got all this other stuff happening too, and DX doing this crazy shit that they're doing, you talk about a dynamic now. Then you throw in the Canadian mix with the Canadian versus U.S. Rivalry that's going on with Bret leading that against Stone Cold leading the U.S. I mean, you got something really freaking awesome there. This war might have ended pretty quick.
All right, real quick, I want to remind everybody, especially this time of year, did you know at SaveWithConrad.com you can skip your next 2 house payments? That's right. You'll get a cheaper monthly payment and no payments until next year. How about a little Christmas vacation from house payments? That's right. No payments in November or December at SaveWithConrad.com.